Partly cloudy and a high of 29 today. Currently 14. Your next news update is at 9. Chicago's Morning Answer continues next on AM 560 The Answer.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios. Only the biggest stories, only the biggest guests, and only the biggest opinions. This is AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. We played this a bit earlier in our extensive discussion of California wildfires and all the angles to that story. But it's worth playing again in the context of our next guest, Adam Carolla's rant on the California wildfires that have devastated so many. We had Joel Pollack on earlier in the program, senior editor from Breitbart, talking about, and who lives in Palisades. He compared it to the 1871 Chicago fire.
Yep. Because the whole city's destroyed. Right now, it's the most historic fire in Los Angeles County's history.
Well, here's Adam Carolla predicting what will come out of this, and perhaps even more pointed because of the growing understanding of the incompetence of the city and the focus of the fire department on diversity under this mayor. Adam Carolla suggesting what you may see a lot of California lefties do as they attempt to rebuild.
Here's what's going to happen. Let me just give you guys a little primer of what's going to happen. You know how Bill Maher seems real conservative now when he's like arguing with Jane Fonda about regulations, too many regulations, like strangling everything? Because remember, when Bill Maher tried to put solar in his house in Beverly Hills, that's when he turned against the government, because he saw what the government and the overreach of government and overregulation does. He got strangled. It took him 3 years to build a solar shack. He had a whole countdown on his show, you know, day 1,000 since I've got my permit for my solar. He turned. Okay. The people who live in Malibu, who live in Santa Monica, who live in the Palisades, those are some of the most progressive blue voters in the world, or in the United States. They are a bastion of blue. So what those guys did is, all the people in the Palisades, I checked it out. It's about 80% blue, 80% progressive, 80% Democrat. Now, these are all sitting around crying about Karen Bass, water pressure, how come the forest wasn't cleared of all the brush, what's happening with the infrastructure. You guys all voted for Karen Bass, the mayor of Los Angeles. You all voted for Gavin Newsom. And now you get what you get. Oh, now that your house is on fire, well, now you're thinking about something else. Now you want to know what's going on. What's going on around here? You didn't give a shit about what was going on when other people's houses were on fire, but now you care. So here's what's going to happen. All these people who were deep blue Democrats are now going to have to pull a permit to rebuild. And they're going to get the 28-year-old bitch from the Coastal Commission telling them to go off. And then they're going to vote for Trump or whoever's Trumpian next. You see, they're going to get turned. They're going to get turned hard because, as I've always said, live in the rent control apartment in Santa Monica, fine, good. We know how you vote. Go deal with the city. Try to pull a permit. These are going to be thousands of homes, super wealthy people, and these people don't want to live in Van Nuys. They like it where they are. They love Malibu. They love the Palisades. They love Santa Monica. There's going to be a whole bunch of rich people, and they're going to go, I'm rebuilding, and I want to rebuild as fast as I can. And between the part where they go in to the Planning Commission and plan check and initially and try to pull a permit to the time the first load of lumber, the first load of 2x4s is dropped off on their lot where their house formerly stood, it's going to be 3 years. And 1,000 permits and 1,000 arguments and 1,000 discussions with the Coastal Commission, not to mention little tidbits that they didn't think about, like Carson Daly. You want a swimming pool? Yep. Got to be double hulled. Really? Yeah. Well, why? Well, what if water leaches out and gets into the groundwater table? Carson Daly had to build a swimming pool like a modern day oil tanker. Had to put like a double hulled. That's all right. It'll just cost $500,000 for a swimming pool. Like that, they're going to be, when they start getting the regulation, they're going to go nuts. And when they start running into the bureaucracy and the red tape, they're going to start going nuts, and they're going to vote for Rick Caruso next time because they want to get. That's all Trump says is we're going to pull back the regulations. We're going to free people up. They're going to find out. They're going to get bit by their own snake. They're going to convert.
Who wants to bet that the Amish build enough homes for all the displaced people in North Carolina before one permit gets approved in Palisades or Malibu? For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Matt Purple, editor and journalist. His new book, Decline from the Top, Snapshots from America's Crisis and Glimmers of Hope. Matt, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, Dan. Hey, Amy. Good morning.
Well, unfortunately, because this is not a laughing matter with people's lives and livelihoods lost, but it does speak to my favorite title of your new book, Decline from the Top, Capitalists Without Chests and Our Politicians Without Brains. I mean, maybe that should have been the title because that seems to be the story that repeats itself over and over again in every sort of major event that that captivates the nation.
Yes, and we seem to have politicians without brains in California this morning in particular. And it's, the book is an amused and hopefully a little bit funny look at American decline just because it's such a depressing subject that, I couldn't write a very serious book about it. It would have depressed me. But I think there's very little funny to be said about what's happening in California. I mean, it's just apocalyptic. The scenes from the news last night were terrible. And it is probably the most regulated state with state and federal regulations in the country. And what that means is it's very difficult to clear away brush. It's very difficult to take fire prevention measures. And once houses do burn down, it's very difficult to rebuild them. You have to go through these environmental impact studies that take years oftentimes, zoning restrictions. I mean, there's all manner of red tape that you have to jump through. And what that means is if you're Gavin Newsom and you're in a gated community, you're safe from the fires, things are okay for you. Things were probably okay for most people in the Pacific Palisades before this, too, as Adam Carolla was saying. But I think we're about to discover just how difficult it is to do anything in California. And we'll see if that prompts the kind of political change that Adam Carolla was talking about.
Well, so the declines from the top, I think, are manifest and people are familiar. So give us some of those more lighthearted glimmers of hope that you picked up upon in your book.
Yeah, I mean, one of them that I've noticed is that we have this young generation now, Generation Z, that is very aware of what's going on because they've grown up with very little except American decline. I mean, it was, for them, their conscious memories, it was 9/11 and then the Iraq War and then the recession and then COVID and on and on and on, right? I mean, just kind of a succession of crises. And I think they understand that something has to change and that it's going to require real productive change. That kind of sitting on our laurels is not going to do anything to improve it. And so maybe it's always risky to put faith in the younger generation, but I like the attitude that I hear from a lot of these people that are now, I'm a millennial, they're now younger than me. It's weird that I'm not, the youngest generation anymore. And then there's other, more specific glimmers of hope too. Like, I think there was a lot of concern during COVID that this was going to have irreversible impacts on our country, these lockdowns and so on. And I think in some ways it did, but we're starting to get past them now. You're seeing bars and restaurants reopen. You're seeing people, emerge back into the sun. There's more kind of community activity, communal activity building up again in a way we were denied during the pandemic. So those are glimmers of hope. We still have a hell of a lot of problems, which is one reason Donald Trump was reelected. But hopefully there's, some silver linings in there too. We talked to Joel Pollack earlier in the program, as I mentioned, and he provided a really good illustration for us from the ground there. He talked about the mall that Rick Caruso owns, one of them, the Palisades Mall.
that he had sort of a fire prevention plan in place, and he had his employees protect the mall, and actually the mall has survived, whereas the town virtually has not. So the private real estate developer with the pragmatic plan of action and the people to implement it, and then the city of Los Angeles, two completely different stories juxtaposed to one another. And, maybe even as we're sort of hoping, but not really seeing a lot of evidence of another great awakening in this country spiritually, we are seeing younger generations, like you mentioned, yours and the one that follows you, the Gen Zers, angling to be more pragmatic, like problem solvers, gamers, if you will.
Yeah, it almost reminds me of the LA riots 33 years ago, where the cops were nowhere to be found in a lot of these neighborhoods, and so people had to take their defense into their own hands and stop rioting, stop crime, protect their businesses. Now you're seeing Angelenos protecting their own buildings, or trying to anyway. But I think there's going to need to be a real reckoning once this is all over. Gavin Newsom, Karen Bass wasn't even in the country. She was in Ghana for some reason, and then she flew back yesterday. She gave, one of the most hackneyed press conferences I think I've ever seen. She was just reading talking points off of a teleprompter. I think there's going to be, even in Democratic California, there's going to be a real reckoning for these people, because this just looks like an apocalypse. It's really terrible. And I think, to your point, if you're looking to draw a larger lesson out of this, you can't rely on the government. The government is really not going to be our solution to solving a lot of these problems that we've gotten ourselves into. That's not to say it doesn't play a role, but I think the thinking and the energy has to come from the bottom up. It has to start on the ground and then filter up to the local and state and federal level. And one thing I say in the book is that, rather than tweeting angrily at your congressman or whatever the case might be, get involved in your local community. Go out into your town or your city, see what you can do at the neighborhood level. I understand a lot of these problems can seem protracted, and that's not going to solve every one of them, but it's better than waiting for the bureaucracy to do something.
Well, what about politicians paying for their sins, though? I mean, you've got Governor Newsom, who basically said that local communities are on their own, but yet they made the decision to stop clearing the brush. Mayor Bass said, she wanted to cut firefighting originally by $23 million, ended up cutting it by $17.6 million and giving that money to help illegals. I mean, shouldn't they have to pay for what the decisions that they made?
Absolutely. Yeah, and there's a lot of bad leadership, a lot of bad regulations at the local level, too. We were talking about housing before. You have an extremely cumbersome process in California where the local towns and cities also have to approve every home construction, and that can lead to a lot of not in my backyard dynamics where, local elements don't want new houses going up. So there's a lot of blame to go around. And yeah, I'm not saying that somehow, that the local level is pristine while the federal level is the real problem. And I think in terms of California, the accountability just needs to come across the board. I mean, we need a thoroughgoing inquiry into everything that happened here. But again, I come back to the point that it starts at the citizen level. Like Adam Carolla was saying, these people voted for Karen Bass over and over again. They voted for Gavin Newsom. I think Gavin Newsom has now been elected, I want to say 3 times because of the recall election, although it could be wrong. Maybe it's just twice.
Yeah.
But multiple attempts to get rid of him. None of that has gone through, has been successful. So, maybe it's time to take a good hard look in the mirror and think about these people who we're electing.
Indeed. And the other thing, too, is I think some of these mayors, like, our Brandon Johnson or LA's Karen Bass, so many of the other big city mayors presiding over cities that are disintegrating before the very eyes of their residents, I don't think they have the coolness factor that they used to with younger people too. That's just sort of intuition on my part, but it just doesn't. The verve of identity politics is a little bit more muted, and I think these people come across as incompetent because they generally are. And I just think that rap doesn't have the same appeal that it did even a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I mean, look, right? Kamala Harris was supposed to be the queen of cool, and she went down to a defeat in the last election. So I think that there's a real sense right now that our problems are so big that coolness is not going to cut it. You know, a vibe is no match for substance in this case. And yeah, I mean, you know, Gavin Newsom, back when he was mayor of San Francisco, was known for being this really cutting edge, handsome guy. You know, he was seen as like this really glamorous, cool mayor. And I think that shine has long worn off. You know, Trump was attacking him yesterday. Those criticisms are going to continue to wear in. A lot of people remember what he did during COVID, you know, some of the harshest lockdowns in the nation. And then he went to the French Laundry and had a nice meal with his friends. So I think a lot of that is going to catch up with him for sure.
Yeah, he's sort of a political Dorian Gray, I think. I think it's going that way for him, which would be well-deserved. Talking about accountability. Matt Purple, he's an editor and journalist. His new book, Decline from the Top, Snapshots from America's Crisis and Glimmers of Hope. Matt, thanks as always. Appreciate it.
Thank you both.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy on the AM 560 The Answer mobile app. Just text the word app to 64636 to download the app today.
Rick Borick, host of Unleash Your Wealth.
When the stock market struggles, when inflation is high, you need to start looking through the inventory of all your accounts and say, is every one of these investments working as hard as it could be? Because every month during high inflation that you waste, you're losing 8 or 9% a year.
Unleash Your Wealth, Saturday at 7 a.m. and our new time at 2 p.m. here on AM 560, The Answer.
Salem News Channel is America's fastest growing conservative TV network.
It's an absolute crazy day.
Home to the largest lineup of free speech champions anywhere. Delivering in-depth insight and unapologetic opinion on today's biggest news stories.
Americans aren't going to put up with this anymore.
SNC brings you the news that matters, told with integrity and clarity. Watch Salem News Channel free.